Yo guys, so welcome back to the channel. I hope you guys are doing fantastic as usual. So we're straight back into this to-do application that we are creating together. And like I promised in the last episode, we will be looking at some ways to style our application in the next coming episodes. So we are going to be looking at some different libraries and frameworks to style our application. So it kind of looks a bit dull right now. I don't think it looks bad, but it looks a bit boring. And of course we want our to-do application to look really good. I mean, who doesn't love to complete a task when the to-do application looks amazing, when it got that modern feeling. So when I use an app, I think I subconsciously like it even more if it's well designed. So there might be something to it or there might not, but let's just look at some different ways to style our application. But we're going to be starting with some slight refactoring. So when we are doing this kind of practical coding, we want to make sure that it doesn't get out of hand. We don't want to get too practical where we are just putting out all kinds of bad code that is not readable or maintainable. So even if it's only you who will be maintaining this code base, it's of course still important that we try to keep the code clean, keep it readable. Then of course you want to have some kind of code style that you can enforce to make sure that things stay readable and that you don't end up thinking, oh, who really wrote this code? And then you look at it and you see it's yourself who wrote that code. So I think it's important to sometimes slow down and look at the code that we are writing when we're doing this, because it's easy to get out of hand if we are not being careful. So we're going to be looking at our code currently. So we have this app.svelte. This is like our main entry point. So I think this looks fine currently, but there are some things, like we said in the previous episode, we don't want this to be just a string, just because whenever we change this string, we might forget to change this here. So when we have this kind of code duplication, it's not really code duplication, but we have a string that we could actually put into a constant. So why not do that? So we're going to make this a constant, something like const to do items, items storage key. That is pretty clear what it means, but it's also a bit concise. So we could be writing something like to do items local storage key, but that might be a bit too verbose. So let's just do items storage key. I think everyone can understand what that is supposed to mean, or at least have a hint of what it's about. So there we go. Now we have items storage key. That looks a bit better. And now we have this amazing highlighting of VS Code. We can also see that we have this brown color here for strings. So we can see that there's not really any strings lying around here in our code base that we could, create a constant for. So it's always good to think about this, creating some constants if they're used in multiple places, to make sure that we're not going to be changing that value somewhere and then it will become a problem somewhere else. So let's see here. Like I said in the previous episode, I don't think we can actually annotate this with a type. So it will only have to be any, this exception here, but maybe we want to actually error it. So instead of console log, I think we can do console.error. And I think that just causes it to log to the console like in red or something. I don't think it's actually like crashes the application or anything like that. So this should be fine. It's a bit more clear that this is an error. When it comes to the future, we probably don't want to be logging this to the console. We might actually want to use like some logging framework, some error logging framework to send off these errors to some central point where we can actually read about them. So there's some different companies that offer this kind of error logging, where you could hook this up to a server and actually get some information about errors that occur in your code. So we might look at that in the future, but that is very, very far off in the future. So we have this modal data. I think this looks a bit weird. So if we had multiple modals lying around here, we would be having a lot of these variables all over the place. So I think that we want to actually create some kind of object for this. I'm not sure if this is considered best practice, but I think it could be a bit more clean. We can just put it in another file and forget about it. How about that? So we can do something like modals.ts, and then we can like create some kind of weird interface for this. I think we do some like export interface modals definition or something, and then we can like put our object, like we can create an object that actually contains these variables, but we kind of contain them a bit more instead of having them all in the same like component file. So we can do something like edit task, and this will be for the edit task modal that we have here. And then we want to have these variables. So we want to have visible and we want to have data. So this will be visible, should be bool, and then we want to have data, which will be task or null. So data, task or null, And there we go. Now we can actually create like an object of this interface. So let's do something like export const modals, modals definition, and then we can have this object here. So edit task, and then we can do visible false. So this will be our default values for this modal. So this should of course be null, so that we don't show any weird modal when we load the page. That would be kind of weird. So now we can actually switch this out here. So we're going to remove these weird variables and actually use something like modals.data and then modals.visible. So, well, modals.edit task, of course. So modals.edit task. And then, of course, down here, we want to bind to the right variable now. So modals.edit task.visible. Then we want to have modals.edit task.data. And let's see if that works. So this is for the edit task modal. So when you click this, you can save that. Yeah, so that seems to work. Seems like nothing broke. Always good to make sure that you're not testing your code as you're writing it, so that you don't introduce some bug. So yeah, now I guess we can clean up our imports as well. Now I think this looks pretty good. You know, you can always improve it. So if you're like me, you're probably gonna be changing this code back and forth. But that is completely up to you and completely fine if you don't want to do that. So, and then with these functions, we also might want to document them. But it's always good to keep like self-documented code. You don't need to be overly verbose in your documentation. I feel like you can always just make sure that the code is readable by itself, but of course you might want to clarify something. So then you can add a comment, maybe ask ChatGPT to write a comment for you. But I'm not going to be adding any comments right now. I feel like it can kind of demotivate me if I'm just going to sit here and write some comments. So we're going to get going here. Well, I think this looks okay. So our cleaning here of app.svelte is complete. Now we're moving on to modal here. Yeah, so we have this type here. So we might want to annotate it with a Boolean type to make sure that we are clear about the type. And now we can see that VS Code is highlighting an error here, or rather a warning. And this is about accessibility. So if you don't know about this, it's always good to keep your website as accessible as possible. So what do I mean about this? Well, so for our case, it's mostly visual impairment. We don't have any really hearing, but you know, if you have a hard time seeing, then you could actually use software like a screen reader that actually reads things to you. And so then it's good to keep our website accessible to those softwares. So we might want to have like different labels for our application. And just like it says here, we have like visible non-interactive elements with an on-click must be accompanied by an on-key down, on-key up, or on-key press event. So I think this is for the screen readers to make sure that they can use different keys than just clicking. So we might have a hard time, you know, moving your mouse, and then you want to actually like press a key on your keyboard, maybe tab around on it. So, but I feel like this kind of stuff deserves an episode on its own. So I will be posting an episode in the future where we actually will be looking at how to make our website accessibility proof. So for now, we are actually gonna be dismissing these warnings. So we're going to be looking at this in the future and making sure that our website is accessible, of course. So having an accessible website could actually lead to you having a better search ranking. So we're definitely going to be looking at that in the future. But for now, I feel like this modal.svelte looks pretty good. So now we're moving on to edit task modal, and let's see if there's anything here. Some indentation, of course. Then I think we have actually got a theme going here where we put the variables over the functions here. So if you notice that, I'm kind of doing that, but I was not being consistent here. So I feel like we want to be consistent when it comes to these kind of things. So you know, you can just scroll up here, and then you can expect that you will find the variables here and not have to, you know, look around in the code too much. So that is also a thing worth considering, you know, putting the variables in the same place, you know, having a general structure and idea about how you want to place your code. So there we go. I think this code looks fine. The modal itself looks really bad in my opinion, but we are going to be looking at that, of course. So we're going to be doing that later. So that looks good. Then we have to do items.svelte. Let's see here. Yeah, I guess this log button we are no longer using. So if we need it in the future, we will just remove this comment. Otherwise, I feel like this looks pretty good. You know, I'm not a big fan of these events here, perhaps, but you know, I think it's fine, just because I would probably want to put these in a function, but we cannot do that because we have this local, temporary variable of this loop here. So you could, of course, pass it in like we discovered. You could pass in the task inside of the dispatch. So we could do that maybe in the future. So if we really start getting anxious by these inline event handlers, but for now I think it looks okay. We can just live with that for now, so that's fine. And then we go to to-do items create. Let's see here, is there anything we could improve here? No, I don't think so really. Maybe a comment perhaps, but other than that it looks pretty okay to me. So then we have to-do item actions. Let's see here. Yeah, so this looks fine to me as well. And then we have to-do item, and here, like I said, we want to keep some kind of consistency where we put our code. So let's put that prop over here instead. Otherwise it looks pretty okay. And then we have our last, our most recent code. I feel like we can just separate the props from the normal variables. That's just a thing. And this code definitely needs some documentation, because if you're like me, you might not completely understand how this string here works. So I feel like we can research this a bit more and actually add a proper comment to this in the future, so that whoever reads this code has somewhat kind of a clue of what it's doing. But of course, we're going to be doing that in a future episode as well. So let's see here. Is there anything we can do? Yeah, we can remove this console log statement, I guess. And then, like I said, this BR here does not look good. So this is kind of considered bad practice to put these kind of BR break line tags. So let's just handle that. You can just do like display block on this file, I think. So if we do type file, I think, and then we can do display block, and this should make it a block element. So that looks pretty good. I think that we are actually finished with this simple little quick refactoring. So now we're actually going to be looking at some different ways to style our application. So however you decide to style your application is completely up to you. So for that reason, I'm actually going to be showing some different frameworks and libraries that you can choose from. Of course, you can choose other libraries than these I show, but I will show you guys there's a lot, and there's plentiful of libraries and frameworks available for you. So it's just about, not choosing whatever someone recommends to you, and actually, looking a bit, finding actually what you find the most comfortable, so that you're not stuck with some really bad looking framework that you are not completely happy with. So I will be showing you guys some different options in the future episodes. And today we're actually going to be looking at something called Tailwind CSS. So now we're actually going to be tackling this completed flag that I was talking about. So I've been talking about this completed flag for a long time now, and we haven't actually implemented it yet. So I feel like that is super important, that we can actually complete a task and just not add like loads and loads of tasks and never complete any of them, of course. So of course, the point of a to-do application is actually to complete tasks. So let's just add that functionality real quick. I feel like it's very straightforward to do in Svelte. So just like, we have this data binding in Svelte, two-way data binding, so we can actually bind this completed, and we're just going to be using like a traditional checkbox. So whenever you check this checkbox, we'll be changing this completed boolean. I don't think there's much to it, and then we'll be saving it to local storage as well. So so to make it persistent. So let's just add that real quick. We have to do item actions here, so we want to do that here, of course. So let's do something like input type checkbox, and there we should get the checkbox. There we go. Then we can style this as well. So I think like we can actually set width and height of this. I just set the width and height of this checkbox to make it a little bit larger. I think that looks pretty decent. So now we're actually going to be binding this to the value. So let's do something like bind checked. So for checkboxes, it's actually bind checked rather than bind value. So if we hover this, it actually says available for type checkbox. So if we were to bind value, this would not work, I think. So the value is actually called checked when it comes to checkboxes. So let's just do something like, here we actually have to expose the data. We don't actually have, we actually don't have access to the task here. So I feel like we could, of course we could expose the whole task object, but I feel like that is a bit overkill. It's a bit unnecessary. So let's just expose the completed variable here. So let's do something like bind completed, and then we do data.completed. So then we can expose this as a prop, of course. So export let's completed a bool, of course. So something like that, and then we bind to completed. And that should be working. So let's see now. I guess we can do some debugging here just real quick to see if that worked. So let's do something like that, and then we check that, and we can see that it works. Isn't that amazing? So whenever we check this checkbox or uncheck it, we want to make sure that we are saving the new value to the local storage. So if we were to complete a task, we don't want that to be removed once we reload the page, of course. So for this, I think we're going to be using our beloved reactive syntax as well, because I think if you just use onChange here, I think that actually runs before it's binding it. So if you have like a data binding here, I think this will actually, if you were to add like an onChange event, I think that would actually be called before it has actually, you know, changed the value inside of the object that we're binding it. So let's just use our reactive syntax, but first let's add a function. So on completed change, and then we can do something like dispatch completed change, and then we can use our beloved reactive syntax on completed change, and then we pass in completed. So whenever this completed variable changes, this function will be called. So that will be dispatching to the parent that we have changed the completed state. So let's just add an underscore here to show that we are not actually using this value. So now we want to pass that on to the parent component. I think we have this here. Yeah, so let's just use event forwarding here because we want to use this from app.svelte. So on completed change, we forward it to the parent component, which is to-do items, and then we want to forward it even further. So on completed change here as well. So now we should have access to that here. So to-do items. So on completed change, we should actually be able to save to local storage. So let's see if that works. So if I were to save this now or check this now as completed, and then we reload, it has actually changed it. Isn't that amazing? So if I uncheck it and reload, yeah. So let's just add a couple here to see that it works. Let's have some pattern here. You can see that it seems to be working. So there we go. Now we have some completed functionality, the long-awaited completed functionality. It might be a bit anticlimactic currently, so we might add some particle effects or something fancy in the future to make sure that the user feels really proud in their dust completion here. But for now, we're just gonna be saving it to local storage. So like I said, we will also be looking a bit at Tailwind CSS today. So I will be showing you guys how to get started with Tailwind CSS, but it's completely up to you if you want to be using Tailwind CSS for your to-do application. So in the next couple of episodes, I will also be showing you guys some other alternatives, some different component libraries with, you know, finished components as well. I feel like that can really help you if you feel like you don't have the energy to come up with your own styling. You know, one of the biggest parts with styling is to be consistent, to make sure that your application looks consistent with all of these components. So that really is really helpful of these component libraries, that they are trying to keep things as consistent as possible. You know, have like a design language that kind of they are following, making sure that they are following that, and that really requires some effort, and you might not have the effort, or you might not feel that interested in designing things. So it's definitely a really good alternative if you don't want to do your own CSS. But we are going to be looking at Tailwind CSS. So it's a bit like a middle ground between components and writing, you know, your full CSS. But Tailwind CSS is really just writing CSS but in the class name itself. So with Tailwind CSS, you are actually writing this CSS in the HTML. So you're writing that as class names. So if you just go to their website, Tailwind CSS, we can read about it here. So rapidly build modern websites without ever leaving your HTML. So of course this is kind of controversial, because the traditional opinion is that you should separate this. So you should put this in, you know, like style.css or whatever. But so by writing all of the CSS in the class names, we actually don't have to come up with our own custom, you know, unique class names. We can just write everything and read everything from the HTML. But of course this can kind of get a bit messy. So especially if you were used to have like a long HTML file, like traditionally, maybe like 1,000 lines of HTML code, then of course it would be kind of messy to have all of this CSS also lying around in that file. But it's really useful when you're working with these kind of component frameworks like React or Svelte in our case, that we can actually contain these classes inside of our components. So it really doesn't get that messy. It's almost like it's almost like the opposite, because we can actually just read the CSS directly. But of course we have our isolated CSS, so it's kind of already solved. But you know, I really come to like Tailwind CSS. I feel like I'm very productive when I work with Tailwind CSS. So this might actually be a worthy contestant for the final CSS framework or whatever that I'm gonna be using in my to-do application. But like I said, it's completely up to you what kind of CSS framework, or if you even want to use one. You can just keep on doing this if you are feeling really comfortable with this CSS, and you feel like you also have the most control, of course, when you're doing it like this. So that's definitely worth noting. So we can read about it here. Best practices don't actually work. It's kind of controversial. You can have your own opinion about this. I personally believe that I'm pretty productive with Tailwind CSS. You might not want to use this for like your biggest enterprise grade software ever, where you have like 100 developers, writing CSS inside of the HTML. But for our small hobby to-do application, I feel like it's really good. I feel like we can really get stuff done quickly. So that is kind of the point in me showing you guys Tailwind CSS as well. So we can read about it here. We got some really nice colors as well. So they have, one of the things I really come to like with Tailwind CSS is that they have like kind of different nuances. So they're kind of consistent in these colors, So if you were to have like blue 900 and then you switch it out for red 900, it would be kind of same. So I'm no color expert, so I'm not really sure what the right term for that is, but I feel like the colors get a bit more consistent. And then also, you can read about it here, it's tiny. We're not shipping like unused CSS. It's not like you put like, because of you writing everything as classes, and then of course, there has to be classes. Someone has actually wrote classes for every single thing. Well, probably not every single thing, but for most things that are possible in CSS. So one thing to note here is that we're actually not shipping CSS that we're not using. So if we only use like BG red 900, we're only using that color, then of course that's the only thing that will be exported. And then it's also very mobile first. So one of the things is with Tailwind CSS is that it's very, we can really do responsive design here. So you can see here with these colons here, we can actually specify that for this kind of viewport width and height, we want to have this kind of padding, and for this we want to have this kind of padding. So one of the nice things with Tailwind CSS is that you can create responsive layouts very quickly. And then there's also state variants that I really like. So just like with the responsive rules, we can also have like hover effects. So whenever you have like hover on this item, we can see we want to have a BG blue 500, and when we hover on this one, we want to have different text colors. So that's also really nice. So there's some more to it, but that is about it for Tailwind CSS. So let's just go ahead and install this real quick and try it out on our application. So you might want to create a backup here just in case you change your mind and you feel like Tailwind CSS is not what you want. So you maybe want to have a backup to go back to. But we are just going to be installing it now and see how we can do some simple styling for our components real quickly. And in the next episode, we might be choosing Tailwind CSS, or we might choose something different. But this is just kind of a getting started video with Tailwind CSS. I'm just showing you guys what it's about. So let's click that Get Started button here. So let's see here, what are we using? Get Started. I think we just want to install this. So let's just use these commands. I guess I'm gonna create a new terminal here. So we just copy these commands and paste them in here and see if that works out. And there we go, that seemed to be working. So we also got a config file. So with Tailwind CSS comes actually a config file where you can configure different options of Tailwind CSS. So here we actually want to do something like this. So we want to have this content. This kind of tells Tailwind CSS which files to apply Tailwind to. So only these files with these kind of extensions will have Tailwind CSS, look for Tailwind classes and actually apply them. So here we want to use Svelte as well, I think. So here we actually maybe only want to use Svelte. Yeah, so let's just do Svelte here for now. I don't think we want to have this in any JavaScript files or HTML files. We don't have any of those currently, so I think this should work. And then we want to add this thing. So I'm not really sure how this works, but this actually is what kind of puts the CSS that you actually want to use. So this is kind of where we tell Tailwind that in this file app.css is where we put the Tailwind CSS. So this is where it generates the tailored CSS. So whatever classes we are using, it will put them here, is from what I understand. So, but here we actually don't want to be doing this. I think this is actually the wrong guide. So we want to do this with Vite like we are using. So let's see if I can search for that. Yeah, so install Tailwind CSS with Vite. Yeah, so definitely we want to be doing this instead. Now note here that actually Svelte is not like supported here, but it does definitely work with Svelte. So no reason to worry. We have just done this, I think, but we have not actually installed post CSS and auto prefixer. So I'm not that familiar with what these things do. I think it's all for kind of processing this CSS and making sure, like I said, that we're not adding any unwanted CSS. So feel free to read about it more because I'm not that experienced when it comes to these things. So let's just copy this command again. I think it will not break even if we just have even if we already have installed Tailwind CSS. So that should be fine. And then we can see here, yeah, so content here. This is probably the same. And then, like I said, we want to put this Tailwind CSS, and let's see if that works. So if I just do npm run dev, oh well, we actually have a development server running already. So let's just see if that works. Let's just use a Tailwind class from the top of my head here. So something like bgred 500. Let's see if that worked. Nope, it didn't. Maybe we need to restart the development server. Nope, that did not seem to work. So I might have made a mistake here. Let's see here. Maybe we actually want to use JS and TS as well. So let's try that out. So like you see here, you can see there is JSX and TSX, which is, the syntax files for React and similar. So that's not what we want to use. We want to use Svelte here, of course. So this is looking in the source directory. I think these double stars actually means that we should look like recursively, like, deeply nested inside of this folder. I think that is nothing to worry about. Let's see here. Maybe I'm missing something else. Okay, for some reason it has not actually created this post CSS. So we might want to run this init file again, just to make sure that we're not missing anything. So let's just run that. Yeah, so now it's actually creating this post CSS file. So let's just rerun the server again and see if that worked. And there we go. We got some really amazing bright red to-do items. So now we're actually using Tailwind CSS already. So just like I said, we're doing everything inside of classes here. So this is all prefix based. So here we're just telling that we have a background, which is BG, and then we specify the colors. But these colors are very consistent. So if you want to have this as a text color instead, you just change this to text. Isn't that amazing? Now we have the same color but on the text, and this, these colors work on different other kinds of styles as well. So I don't know all of them from the top of my head, but pretty much everything that you can color, you can actually use these colors with. So that's kind of neat. How are we actually going to be styling this? Well, I think we're going to be adding some rounding. I think we're going to just be styling this real quickly here. From the top of my head, something that I feel like looks okay. So let's just add some rounding. You can do this with rounded. And the documentation for Tailwind CSS is completely amazing, by the way. I feel like you can just read this if you're unsure about anything. You can do rounded corners. We can read about it here. They have some amazing examples. You can find about everything that you want here. So that's kind of neat. We just search it up if you're unsure. So now we have some rounded corners. We didn't have to think about some weird border radius things. We just put rounded and it's rounded. Isn't that amazing? So now let's see. Also one of the things with Tailwind CSS is that it's resetting styles. So there's kind of some default styles that you might not want that comes from, the default HTML or CSS spec, I guess. For example, like having these borders on input fields, which is now being removed. So it's also acting as like some reset thing. I think that's what it's called. So border styles are reset globally. Yeah, so I think it actually removes the borders. Like I said, it also changes some other things that you can read about here. So it's just resetting some base styles that you might not want. So now let's just see if we can change something else here. So now we have this. I feel like we could actually make this look a bit better if we were to have like a darker background here and make these stand out. That's just something I've come to really appreciate lately in my own project. So let's just try that out real quick, I guess. And with Tailwind CSS, I don't think I showed this. We can actually do something like apply as well. So this is actually works like creating a class, but you can actually apply these in styles. So just like in normal CSS. So we can do something like body here. I think we can do body, and then we can do apply here. So BG gray 100. I think that should be working. Maybe not. Let's see here. Maybe that doesn't work here. I'm pretty sure it does though, but maybe it's just not recognized by Svelte currently. So yeah, that did not seem to work. Let's see if background color works. If I just were to make it gray. Unknown, unused CSS selector body. What am I doing wrong here? Okay, I don't actually have a body in app.svelte. That is kind of strange. We never added one, so it's just being added automatically, I guess, by the document. So now it works, but we have some horrendous padding on it as well from app.css. So yeah, let's just remove that here, I guess. There we go. And then we can add it here instead. I feel like that is fine. Since we're just putting everything in app.svelte anyways, we kind of have this as our main file anyways. So why put it in the global CSS if we don't need to? So now let's try that Tailwind apply again and see if it works this time. So BG gray 100. So it's slightly gray here. I don't think I actually want this margin. And so instead of margin, we actually want padding. But why not use some Tailwind now? So P4 I think might look good. So this is just from the top of my head from what I have learned. I'm just learning some different styles, but you can read about here. So you know they are actually specifying what the real value is here. So you can see all of the real values here. You might also notice that there's PT, PR, PB, PL, and that just stands for like the direction. So you can actually have like PT, that is padding top. You can see it still remains on the top here. You can have PR, and then we have padding on the right. And there also exists PX, which is of course from, you know, horizontal. So it's both left and right. And we can also have PY, and that is up and down, you know, so top and bottom. So, you know, they're really consistent when it comes to these things. So if I want this to be margin instead, I just change the P to an M. So this will be MI4. We cannot really see any difference here. But, you know, I can also add like MI8. Yeah, so that kind of works. It is really consistent. So if you feel like, if you just want to change this really quickly, you really have to change very little of your code. So I don't think I actually discussed this apply. So this is like if you want to create a class for it anyway. So you might actually want to do this, especially if you're doing this in the global CSS. So if you want to reuse Tailwind style in multiple components, you might want to do that in app.css. But for our case, we're just doing it here just to show that you can do this with apply in Svelte here as well. I think we can actually like install some plugin to make VS Code happy about this, but for now we're just gonna be leaving it like that. So then of course we can just put this class directly on that, and we can just skip the styling completely here. So that achieves the same result. But now let's not talk too much about this and actually, you know, implement something. So let's do BG gray 50. So I think 50 is the lowest you can go. You can see it almost looks like white. You can barely tell, at least not my eyes can do that. So you can somewhat tell that it's not completely white. Then we want to have some padding as well. It's a bit tight there. That looks pretty good. And now we want to make sure that our items here have BG white, since they're kind of inheriting the parent background color. So we just want to make sure that this is BG white. So BG white is just completely white. There's also BG black, of course. Then we want to add some shadow. So we can do something like shadow MD, I think, drop shadow. Yeah, so these shadow MD, all LG and XL, this is kind of just the size of the shadow. So this LG MD is just styling. I think this is medium, and this is small, and this is large, and this is XL, of course. So that just shows how much shadow we want. But do we want to use shadow MD? I feel like so. Well, we want to use shadow, maybe not drop shadow. Oh, maybe drop shadow. I guess we can try it out. Drop shadow MD. So I'm just showing you guys that you can kind of get this nice coming out of the page effect by adding some shadow, adding some, contrast in the colors. I feel like that looks pretty okay, So I kind of feel like it's got a pretty good facelift from just a few lines of Tailwind here. So of course you could just write this with normal CSS as well, but I'm just showing you guys some of the capabilities of Tailwind CSS. I feel like maybe I will be showing you guys some more of Tailwind in the future episodes, especially if we choose to continue with Tailwind CSS. I'm not sure about that yet. So we're going to be looking at some other different alternatives in the next episode for different component libraries, some different styling frameworks, so that we can just show that there's plenty of options. You should not feel like you have to choose Tailwind just because I think that I'm gonna be choosing Tailwind for my design, but it's completely up to you what you feel looks the nicest, and you feel like it actually resembles your application and can actually provide you with the tooling that you need to create the most awesome application possible. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. So feel free to comment if you have any questions or if you caught me doing something stupid. Also feel free to subscribe if you want to. It would be amazing to create a community around this. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace out.